So I'm going to speak about pseudo-holomorphic curves and application of this method in different directions of mathematics. In fact, we together with Alexandre Soukov, we shall give a connected series of talks. So our talks will depend on each other. So you should take them as some common course of 7 or 8 lectures. So the title of today's lecture will be Beltrami equation. So, in fact, what I'm going to do is to tell you some prehistory of the theory of pseudo-holomorphic curves, which was developed 60 years ago, more or less. To make a connection with complex structures, let me start from the following remark. We consider R2 the usual plane with standard coordinates x and y, and with complex coordinate z equal to x plus iy. This coordinate system is related to the usual basis E1, E2 of R2, and in R2 we have we can multiply, let's see this way, we can multiply vectors by I. So we know what is, so if V is a vector in R2, then we know what is IV. Okay. So more specifically, we know that I times E1 is E2, and I times E2 is minus E1. So therefore, we can see this multiplication by I as an operator. So it will be called a standard complex structure, standard complex structure. This operator acts from R2 to R2, and its decisive property is that the square of this operator is equal to minus identity. In the standard basis, which I have, this operator has the following matrix. So due to these relations, its matrix is 0, 1, minus 1, 0. Now, after this was said, I would like to generalize this picture and to consider a complex structure on R2 which depends on a point. Therefore, I would like to consider a family J depending on Z of linear maps of endomorphisms of R2 satisfying the following condition. J square is minus identity for any Z in its domain of definition. So D will be a domain in R2. About function j, I will suppose for the moment that it is measurable. Of course, in the most part of our lectures, the structure will be supposed to be sufficiently smooth. A pair B with such an operator, it's a starting example of an almost complex manifold. Okay, this will be the principal object of our study in our lectures, but for the moment we consider a very simple example of a domain in R2. And at each point, more precisely at almost every point, because we suppose that this function is only measurable, at almost every point, we have a sort of multiplication by I. That means that for every vector, we know what is j at point z of v. And one more application of this minus v is j of v. So it's an operator in the tangent space which acts in this way. Now I'm going to propose you an exercise which describes how you can interpret this j. So prove that if j is a linear map from R2 to R2, linear map such that j square is equal to minus indefinity, then j has the following form. In the canonical basis, E1, E2, j is a c minus 1 plus a square over c minus a. So here a is any real number, c is a non-zero real number. Well, therefore, a complex structure, this is a complex structure, a complex structure is a matrix which depends on z and which has this form a of z, c of z, minus 1 plus a of z square divided by c of z and minus a of z, where functions a and c are measurable and c never vanishes. This is a almost complex structure on a domain in R2. Now you see that almost complex structures are divided naturally into two classes. First, where C is positive, and second, where C is negative. So what does that mean? If you take d over dx, well, which is E1 if you want, and j times j at z of d over dx, and look on this as a basis in R2, or let's be more precise, a basis of the tangent plane to R2. Of course, this is the same as R2. Then the transition matrix from this basis to the canonical basis is 1, so d over x, and this is AC. Its determinant is C. So C is positive when this basis has the same orientation as a canonical basis, and negative if this orientation is opposite to the canonical orientation. And this orientation is a canonical orientation of a complex structure, as we understand in complex analysis. Yes? All complex objects are oriented in this way. You take some real vectors and I times these vectors, and this gives you a canonical orientation of a complex manifold or domain. Well, definition. Let D1, J1 and D2, J2 be domains in R2 with complex structures J1 and J2. A J1, J2 holomorphic map J1, J2 holomorphic map is an R differentiable map H from D1 to D2 such that its differential commutes with complex structures, such that for almost every Z in D1, DH of J1 is equal at Z, okay, this should be taken at Z, is equal to J2 at H of Z DH at Z. As maps from the tangent plane at point Z to the tangent plane and point H of Z. Okay, so differential is a linear map between tangent planes, and at every tangent plane we have a complex structure. So in other words, for every V in the tangent space at Z, one has that DH at Z from J1 at Z of V is equal to J2 at point h of z of dh at z of v. Well, let us make a simple computation. Suppose that both structures are standard. J1 is equal J2 is a standard structure, means multiplication by I. So let us see what does that mean. Due to the condition that J square is equal to minus identity, this relation is sufficient to check on one vector. Because if you check it on vector v, then it will be also fulfilled on vector j of v, and then this is the basis. So let us take as vector v d over dx. And then we have that dh on d over dx should be equal of on j standard applied to d over dx should be equal on j standard applied to the vector dh of d over dx. So this is a derivative dh over dx. This is multiplication by I. This is d over dy for the standard structure. You just rotate it. And therefore, this thing is dh over dy. So we see that we have dh over dy should be equal to I times dh over dx. And this is a Cauchy-Riemann equation. So not surprisingly, we see that our definition in the case of the standard complex structure gives us the notion of a holomorphic function. A little bit later today, we shall see that every domain bounded, at least, well, every domain in R2 with a complex structure is biholomorphic to a domain with a standard structure. So in R2, this general definition, in fact, does not give you a new notion. But this is not the case in R4. And our lectures will be about that. Now, question? Okay. Now let us write this equation in general case. So consider a mapping from a complex domain dj to R2 with a standard complex structure. And then our equation, well, I should put a star here probably. Then equation star will mean the following: dh on j on d over dx is equal. Now j2 is standard I dh over dx. Now this guy, according to our exercise, is given by this matrix. Therefore, j from d over dx is a times d over dx plus c times d over dy. Okay, so this is a times d over dx plus c times d over dy. And therefore, we obtain that a times dh over dx plus c times dh over dy is equal to I times dh over dx. Now, you can replace d over dx and d over dy by d over dz and d over dz bar, and you will get the following relation: dh over dz bar plus a minus I 1 minus c over a minus I 1 plus c dh over dz equal to 0. Okay, this is 2 lines exercise, computation. And let us denote, well, all depends on z, of course. A and c depend on z. And we suppose that our structure has a canonical orientation. So we suppose that c of z is positive for all z. So we suppose the structure has canonical orientation. And then you see that the square of modulus of this coefficient q is, what is that? A square plus 1 minus c square divided by a square plus 1 plus c square. And in the case of a positive c, it's strictly less than 1. Equation dh over dz bar plus q of z dh over dz equal to 0 is classically known as Beltrami equation. Beltrami equation. Q is a Beltrami coefficient, of course, and it is well known that the theory of Beltrami equation works well if one has this condition, if the modulus of Q is less than 1. And this is always our case if we go to this equation from complex structures. Now we shall suppose that Q, the sup norm of Q in D is less than 1. This will be our assumption. And under this assumption, we are going to prove that our domain is B-holomorphic to a domain with a standard complex structure. Well, for that reason, and also for the needs of the whole this course, for the whole week, I will need some facts from some classical facts, let's say this. So immediate motivation for the things which I'm going to tell you now is to solve the Beltrami equation. In the second lecture, these things will be used to prove the existence of pseudo-holomorphic curves. Proof is roughly the same. second point is Sobolev embeddings and Cauchy-Green operators. So by omega will always denote a smoothly bounded relatively compact domain in C. So it's a domain in C, a relatively compact, boundary smooth. So in most cases, omega will be the unit disk. But sometimes it will be the whole C, which is not relatively compact. By LP of omega C, or simply LP of omega, we shall denote the usual LP space with the norm integral of omega modulus f to the power p d lambda 1 over p. By LK p omega, we shall denote the Sobolev space f such that the following norm is finite, LKP, which is the sum of the norms of derivatives di of f, LP norms, I from 0 to k. di of f is a derivative di1 plus I2 f over dx I1 dy I2. Modulus I is I1 plus I2. What else? K is an integer. Bigger or equal than 0. P is, well, for us, we shall mostly work in this interval. Well, it can be 1 and infinity, of course, but most 1 and infinity is not pleasant case. Now, so this will be this is a Sobolev space LKP. Hölder space CK alpha. Well, K is the same. Alpha between 0 and 1 is a space of functions with a, okay, well, I wrote something here. So LKP is a space where this norm is finite. Okay. So in other words, all derivatives of f up to order k should be in LP. The same with Hölder spaces. The following norm should be finite. So CK norm of f plus, for the derivative of order k, di of f of z minus di f of w divided by z minus w, sup of z, z not equal to w in omega, and modulus of I equal to k. For derivatives of order k, this thing should be finite. I missed alpha, yes? Thank you. When alpha is equal to 1, one calls this space K Lipschitz. And when alpha is equal to 1, this thing, this part, is called a Lipschitz constant of F. If alpha is equal to 1 and K is equal to 0. So Lipschitz constant is F of Z minus F of W, Z minus W sup Z not equal to W. Okay, I think that's all I need about functional spaces. Now I will need few operators acting in the spaces. No, I'm sorry. Before I speak about operators, I will need embedding theorems. So theorem 1, which is usually known as Sobolev embedding. So first statement, for P between 1 and 2, not including 2, and any Q between 1 and 2P over 2 minus P, one has the following embedding: L K P omega embeds to L K minus 1 Q of omega. So number of derivative decreases, but Q increases. This is the meaning of the statement. Well, that means the way one uses this is that there exists a constant LPQ such that the norm of F in LK minus 1Q is bounded by this constant norm of F in LKP. This is the way one uses this theorem. So one can estimate. So, for example, if our function is in 1p in L1p, and p is rather small, close to 2, then the statement ensures you that your function is in LQ with Q arbitrarily big, almost in L infinity, and you have a bound. So if Q is strictly less than 2p minus over 2 minus p, then this embedding is compact. Is a compact operator. B. For p bigger than 2, one has better. For b bigger than 2 and any alpha less than 1 minus 2 over p, we have the following embedding: LKP of omega embeds to C k minus 1 alpha omega. Well, that means, again, that there is a constant which I will denote. Well, this constant is due to Lebesgue, is named by Lebesgue, and this by Hölder, h p alpha, such that the Hölder norm in C k minus 1 alpha is bounded by h p alpha norm in LKP. Again, if alpha is strictly less than 1 minus 2 over p, then embedding is compact. Well, so any book, well, the reference for this is any book in partial differential equations. For example, Gilbert-Trudingner. Yeah, okay, I forgot that I can move this blackboard. Well, we shall define the Cauchy-Green operator. Cauchy-Green operators on L1. So for function in L1, we write Cauchy-Green of this function on Z. Now, it depends on omega. So if function is L1 on omega, then in principle I should write omega here, but I will never do that. Only once. So its integral is the integral 1 over 2 pi I over omega f of psi minus z d psi bar. So if you see this integral as a convolution of L1 function with a kernel 1 over psi minus z, then you conclude that this function is also in L1. So it's a well-defined operator. I don't say that it's continuous, just well-defined operator from L1 to L1. And again, just for reference, we shall need one more operator, Cauchy-Green of Z. We'll conjugate one, f of psi bar minus z bar, d psi bar. So as you well know, no, let it be theorem. You have the following relation: d bar of Cauchy-Green of f is equal to f in the sense of distributions, and d of t bar Cauchy-Green of f is equal to f in the sense of distributions. So what is the proof? You prove this for smooth functions with complex support, and this gives you the statement for distributions. Okay. Well, now, okay. Now, what does that mean? Of course, we shall work, as I told you, in L spaces, in LP spaces with P bigger than 1, mostly with P bigger than 2, in fact. And then these operators are much better. So in a moment, we shall see that then if F is in LP, then P bigger than 1, then Cauchy-Green of F is in L1P of omega. So, and now let me start to explain you why is that. So first of all, what we need to prove that this function is in L1P. We need to prove 3 things. First thing is that this function is itself in LP, which is obvious. It's a convolution with a nice kernel. Second thing, we need to prove that its derivative over dz bar is in LP. But due to this relation, this is F. So it is in LP. Derivative, I'm sorry, of the Cauchy-Green transform of F. So Cauchy-Green transform of F is in LP. This is obvious. Its derivative with respect to z bar is equal to F, and therefore it is in LP again. And now the question is, what is df d of the Cauchy-Green of F over dz? We want to understand this. If we have that this derivative belongs to LP. Now, what is the problem? The problem is that this derivative, if you differentiate this relation with respect to z, you will get a singular integral operator. So from here, you see more or less that the derivative of the Cauchy-Green of F over dz, it should be something like this. It should be the integral over omega f of xi minus z to the square. This integral does not exist in the usual sense, but it exists as a principal value. So this integral exists as a limit of integrals over omega minus small disk over z when epsilon goes to 0. This function of z, if you define it in this way, it is well defined. So this singular integral operator defined in this way is called a Calderon-Zygmunt operator. This is a Calderon-Zygmunt of z, of f of z. And this operator is our derivative with respect to dz. And this we want to be in LP. This is ensured by the Calderon-Zygmunt theorem. So theorem 3, which is a Calderon-Zygmunt inequality. So it says that the Calderon-Zygmuth of f, which I repeat, this is a derivative of the Cauchy-Green of f over dz, in LP norm of omega is bounded by LP norm of f with some constant GP which depends on omega, on the domain, of course. And the same d bar of t bar Cauchy-Green, which will be, again, this is the same operator, but over psi bar minus z bar square, it satisfies also this inequality, well, with the same constant. Okay, as a corollary, we get that Cauchy-Green transform is a bounded linear operator from LP to L1P of omega, and the norm of the differential of f in LP is bounded by 1 plus GP omega norm of f no, I'm sorry, in LP. It's not f. It's Cauchy-Green. Okay. Well, now this will be very important. I'm sorry, differential of the Cauchy-Green. So differential of the Cauchy-Green transform can be, LP norm can be bounded by LP norm of f. Well, okay, so as usual, now one more, well, I need one more statement, which is known as Giraud inequality. Well, and this stays the same as Calderon-Zygmuth, yes, Calderon-Zygmuth only in Hilbert classes. So I will write this in this way. D of Cauchy-Green of f in C alpha of omega is bounded by some A alpha of omega f in C alpha of omega. And the same for d bar and t bar. Okay, so that means again that Cauchy-Green acts from from C alpha omega to C1 alpha of omega and is a bounded linear operator. Of course, in all the statements you can put here k. And the same here. So Cauchy-Green increases smoothness by 1. This is a general statement. Well, so as usual, I have less time than I thought, so I cannot give you a proof. So about proofs, but let me say a few things about proofs. So there are direct references for these statements. This you can find in, well, of course, you can find this in original papers, in paper of Calderon-Zygmunt and Giraud, of course. But then you can find it in the book of Vekwa, which is much better than original papers. And you can also find this in the appendix to the paper of Nuremberg, Nijenhuis-Wolf. Nijenhuis-Wolf. It's Annals of Mathematics. Well, it exists only one such paper. I don't remember, 63, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Around this year.
How do you spell the first reference?
Nijenhuis-Wolf. Vekwa. Vekwa. It's a book. It's a book in Pergamon. In Pergamon Press. I think 62. Okay, plus minus 1, 2 years. Well, okay, I can give you exact references, of course. So Vekwa is 62. The name of the book, Generalized Analytic Functions. Analytic functions. Generalized analytic functions means in this book the solutions of the Beltrami equation. And the paper of Nijenhuis-Wolf is Annals mm, 63. Well, it's remarkable, so everything is correct, 63. Good. Well, but this it's a direct references, but this is not the best way maybe to learn them. The better way is to see that all this can be obtained from analogous estimates for the Laplace operator. Because the green operator, which corresponds to Laplace, is a convolution with, so of f, is a convolution with a logarithm. Okay, well, with some coefficient here, okay. And now, if for this operator you prove these estimates, then you will easily get them for the Cauchy-Green operator, because you see that the derivative derivative of this with respect to z bar gives you Cauchy-Green. Okay, and the same estimates for the Laplace operator are absolutely classical, and then you can find in any book. And for example, in Gilbert-Trudinger. Gilbert-Trudinger. Then you can find these estimates for Laplace operator, and they will be better. They will be that the green operator embeds LP to L2P, of course, for the Laplacian. And then you differentiate and you will get to L1P, and this is this statement. Okay? This way you can get from more easy sources these estimates. Well, now let me give the first application. So all this machinery I need, as I told you, I need to prove, to find solutions to the Beltrami equation. And then later to find pseudo-holomorphic curves. So third point is, I would call it Einsatz of Vekwa. theorem. Let Q be a measurable function with compact support in C, such that its sup norm, which will be denoted by Q0, is less than 1. Then there exists a unique solution H of the Beltrami equation, dH over dz bar plus Q of z dH over dz equal to 0. Let me give to this equation mark B, such that H solution is defined on the whole projective line P1. Well, this is a Riemann sphere, notation for the Riemann sphere, such that H of 0 is 0. It's a normalization. H at infinity is infinity, and derivative at infinity, so 1 over z H of z goes to 1 when z goes to infinity. This H belongs, has a regularity L1p locally for some p bigger than 2, but not too much. Now, recall that due to the Sobolev embedding L1p with p bigger than 2 embeds to C alpha with alpha equal 1 minus 2 over p. So this function is Hölder continuous. It's not so bad. Okay. Now, what I will not prove, because it's quite technical, in addition, so remark, in addition, well, just this thing may be not really a theorem of Vekua, but he proved more. In addition, H is a homeomorphism of P1 onto itself the inverse homeomorphism satisfies the same type of equation, but quasi-linear. D j over dz bar minus, I think, q of g of z, so it's quasi-linear. dg over dz bar over the whole thing equal to 0. Okay. Now, this I'm not going to prove. I shall prove the first part of this statement. Now we shall look for a solution in the following form: h of z equal to z plus Cauchy-Green transform of some potential omega of z, where this 0 means the following thing, that we take T0 Cauchy-Green of omega of z is a Cauchy-Green minus this function at 0. So we just subtract its value at 0 to have that this function at 0 is equal to 0. Okay. Now we obviously have that h of 0 is 0, h at infinity. This disappears at infinity because it's integral of 1 over xi minus z. Okay, so it's infinity. And h of z divided by z, this disappears, this term of course, and z over z, so it converges to 1. So if you find solution in such a form with omega will belong to some LP with compact support, then this solution, if it will be a solution, it will satisfy these 3 normalization conditions. Okay. Now let us put this into the equation. And so we will get dh over. So when differentiating this guy with respect to z bar, we get omega plus q times. When differentiating with respect to z, we have 1 plus Calderon-Zygmunt derivative of the Cauchy-Green, Calderon-Zygmunt omega, and this should be equal to 0. Okay, or we have that omega plus Calderon-Zygmunt of omega times q is equal to minus q. So what we have here is an identity operator plus q times Calderon-Zygmunt applied to omega is equal to minus q. Now q is bounded measurable function with compact support. Therefore q belongs to LP for any p, LP of c for any p. Now the Calderon-Zygmunt operator acts from LP to LP. Well, we can suppose that support of our function somewhere we suppose that support of q belongs to the unit disk. Okay, this can be made, and then Calderon-Zygmunt acts from LP to LP, and its norm in LP is this constant g, which I have here. Is constant GP, where omega is a unit disk now. Now, about this constant, many things are known, and what I will need is that this constant behaves in the following way. it depends on p in this way. So for p equal to 2, it's equal to 1. So g of 2 in L2, this constant is equal to 1, and its logarithm is convex. Logarithm of j of p is convex. In particular, this thing decreases when p goes to 2. Well, what I need from all this, I need the following thing. I see that the norm of the operator q times Calderon-Zygmunt in LP will be less than the sup norm of q, which is q0 times jp. Now, this guy is less than 1. And if I take p sufficiently close to 2, this guy will be close to 1. So I can make it less than 1 for p bigger than 2, but close to 2. So I will have two things at a time. I will have that this constant is less than 1, and I will work still in LP classes for which the Sobolev embedding works. So what does that mean? Now I have this. I want to invert this operator. If this term has a norm less than 1, then this operator is invertible, and therefore I can write I can find a solution to my problem, omega, as identity plus q times Calderon-Zygmunt minus 1 of q in LP of the disk. So if taking p close to 2 in order to have this norm less than 1, I can invert this operator. It will be just sum of q times Calderon-Zygmunt to the power n, as you know very well, minus 1 to the power n. So this series converges of q. And this omega will be in LP. And its support, due to this equation, you see, moreover, that the support of omega is included in the support of q. Well, and solution is unique. Our operator is invertible. So for a given right-hand side, we find a unique solution to our problem. Okay. Now, so my plan, my plan was to give you one more application of this method, but what is that? 1 second. So it seems that I lost some sheets of my notes. No. Well, so well, okay. Let me stop this exposition on this point when we solve the Beltrami equation, and you will see in the next lecture, in the following lecture by Alexander Sukhov, that inverse equation can be solved in the similar way, if even it is a quasi-linear, and it has a more general meaning. Now, what I wanted to do, I want to propose you a few simple exercises just for the case if you are not very familiar with these techniques. Okay, so first, so there was already one exercise. The second exercise, you can take a function f of z equal to 1 over z times ln of modulus z, and remark that this function belongs to L1 of delta. Well, it's obvious. And that df over dz bar also in L1. But, so therefore, more or less, f is a Cauchy green of df over dz bar from L1, but df over dz, check that this thing does not belong to L1 of d. So you don't have, so the Cauchy green is not acting well in L1, but only in LP for p bigger than 1.
What is the function again?
1 over z times logarithm of z. Now, okay, this is very easy exercise, but just to make you a little bit accustomed with these techniques, and then few more exercises. Exercise 3. So prove the following. Prove that for a function, for a continuous function in the closed unit disk, integral over the boundary of the Cauchy green of f of xi minus z d xi is equal to 0. And the last thing, so let delta r z0 be a disk of radius 1 with center at 0, then prove that the Cauchy green transform at this disk over this disk from function 1 at z is a z bar minus z0 bar, and then derive from here that the Calderon-Zygmuth transform, again in this domain, which is the disk of function 1, as a function of z is identically 0. So now, if these things are new for you, this Calderon-Zygmuth, Cauchy green, just do these few exercises to become accustomed with them. Well, so nevertheless, since I have 10 minutes more, I will state the statement which can be proved in a very similar way, as a Einsatz of Vercoa, but probably I don't have time to prove it. So holomorphic motions. So let me make a picture. So let this be a unit disk in C, and this is C. And take a finite set E in C, a finite set, and consider finite number of holomorphic functions f tau. So holomorphic functions from disk to C, which are continuous up to the boundary. Okay. And such that f tau of 0 is equal to tau. Tau runs over our set E. Well, so for every tau, we have a holomorphic graph. Theorem. This was proved by Slotkovsky. There exists a family F W. W belongs to C. So family of holomorphic functions So I'm sorry, I forgot one condition. So we suppose that the graphs of these functions do not intersect. So f tau 1 of z is not equal to f tau 2 of z if tau 1 is not equal to tau 2 for all z in disk. So we have a disjoint union of holomorphic graphs. Well, you can see as a motion. You can see as a holomorphic motion of some set. So some set E holomorphically is traveling holomorphically. Okay, this is a picture. Then the statement is that you can include this motion to the motion on the whole complex plane. So there exists a family parameterized by complex plane C of holomorphic functions in the disk, continuous up to the boundary, such that, well, first of all, f omega is equal to f tau for omega equal to tau. Second, f of omega of 0 is equal to omega And third, f omega 1 of z is not equal to f of omega 2 of z whenever omega 1 is different from omega 2 for all z in the disk. So you can extend this motion. You can fill all this with a graph, with a non-intersecting graphs of holomorphic functions. Okay, so the interesting thing here is that the proof can be achieved using this method, more or less. Okay, thank you.